What's up, guys? This is CJ, aka The Wolf, coming to you here from the Wolf's Cave. I I don't know how long I'm actually going to be on here. It's been a long week. I had to take care of some stuff with my truck. I just got this new laptop and I got a new tablet. I'm just trying to make sure everything works and, hopefully the audio is good. I don't want to feel like I'm talking my butt off for a while and nothing's coming through, but I think it should be okay. I tested everything out as best as I possibly could. Um, so, I'm sorry for the delay. I just got a message from my mom. She was coaching in the volleyball playoffs for the second round, and unfortunately they came up short for yeah, 4 games. So I'll contact her like in a few minutes or so to see what happened with it. But sorry about that. Okay, so I'm not gonna be too long on here. I'm gonna do my best to be as quick as I possibly could with the information. I would love to talk more about what happened with this past weekend, but it was shite, pretty much. I think the weekday games from last week was probably the most entertaining I would get out of it. I got to watch a little bit of Kennesaw State and FIU because I love the running back and the quarterback from FIU, even though they're not that great, but they do compete, they do play. Kajon Owens, he's a damn good back, to be honest. If he was not a senior, man, I think he could have gone to the transfer portal and gone elsewhere, but he stayed. He stayed with FIU and just played it out. So I would look at him if he decides to go to the NFL as probably an undrafted, maybe a late round pick. He's actually a pretty damn good back. I'm not going to go too much into all the games that I've watched during the week, except my Nevada got shat on by Boise State, so I'm not going to go into that. But yeah, there was not a whole lot of good games, to be honest, throughout this week, except like Alabama and South Carolina was as competitive as it's going to be. Ole Miss against Oklahoma, and I'm still feeling the pain of that loss. I mean, defense did about as everything as they possibly could to give the offense a chance, and then they just got tired, and the offense got desperate and just did everything they possibly could to try to keep up with Ole Miss, but unfortunately came up too short for it. Vanderbilt Mizzou was a good game. It was pretty dragged, but it was a physical defensive battle. I mean, it was just that gritty old school football that you would get out of it. But unfortunately, Bo Pribula had a pretty serious, I think, ankle or leg injury. So he's done for the season. Mizzou's down two QB, so now they're down to just the freshman. They got talent, but how's the freshman going to do with them? BYU was kind of struggling a little bit against Iowa State, but then they kind of woke up and just took control in the second half and just beat out Iowa State. So I'm pretty happy for them. I'm rooting for them to go as far as distant as they possibly could. Memphis came back, was in a back to back with USF for a little bit. Ended up winning and upsetting USF, so now the door is wide open for other Group of Five schools to have the opportunity of getting the highest Group of Five. Um, Group of Five, conference championship wise, blah blah blah, yada yada yada. But Memphis has leverage, but their schedule down the stretch is going to be tough, and I'm going to explain that in a moment as quick as I possibly can. Texas and Mississippi State. If I were Mississippi State, you need to leave the SEC. You had that one chance of beating Texas. Kentucky had it as well too, and they failed in overtime. Unbelievable. Two of those games took Texas to overtime and just could not finish the game. Mississippi State had a chance to close things out prior to even that even being possible, but they let Texas come back, including the special teams return touchdown to tie the game. I was not happy about it. So, you know, at Mississippi State, you need to leave the SEC. Go play for the ACC or something. Make yourself useful elsewhere because you're Garbo right now. You haven't beaten an SEC team yet, from my knowledge, and just the fact that you were wherever you were, you're still not good. And I never liked that head coach. He was an OC for Oklahoma. Jeff Lebby. I was just never a big fan of Jeff Lebby. I want better for Mississippi State fans, so I hope he goes. Um, Houston actually got the best of Arizona State. That was a nice win for them. So now they're kind of in line to try to get to the conference championship if things work in their favor. Okay, let's see. Wake Forest got the best of SMU. That was a pretty dragging defensive battle, a bit ugly, but Wake Forest is no slouch. If anybody hasn't watched them, I would kind of give them a chance to watch because they're actually a competitive team like Virginia, even though Virginia's a little bit better than Wake Forest. Um, yeah, so that's about it. Like I said, it wasn't that entertaining of a college football weekend. Well, outside of Iowa destroying Minnesota, that was a lot of points they've scored, probably in a season. Um, it wasn't that entertaining to be honest. Just wasn't. I wouldn't say I wasn't really into it. I kind of got a break a little bit, like from week one to like week seven, week eight has all been great games, and I watched like three to four of them at a time. And now these last 2 weeks has really been one or two games at a time per slot, like morning, afternoon, and evening. So it kind of gave me a little bit of a break and just done a little bit more homework on college football. Which, speaking of that, comes into the rankings. Now, I'm not really going to go too much into it. I am probably just going to throw out the remaining schedule that all the top 25 teams have, what the possibilities of teams outside of those rankings have of maybe being in playoff contention. From what I've seen here so far, I'm seeing like six teams probably getting into the college football playoff, but still, there's still about 4 to 5 games left to even decide like who is in where, pretty much. But it has been good. There really hasn't anybody that was actually the runaway, except maybe two teams in the Big Ten and maybe Texas A&M. So as far as anything, the door is still wide open, and we are approaching November. And for anybody that may not be aware, November is the month of traps and potential upsets and chaos, which is always my favorite. And I will love to see everything. This is where every football team has to be locked in because they know they're playing down the stretch of this game in the regular season and they have to play their A game even if it's against bad teams. They can't have any sloppiness, they can't have any slip ups. If they want to get to the college football playoffs, they have to play their A game no matter what. Even if they get into the conference championship, if you're not undefeated by then, or you have a one loss, but it's just not convincing, you lost to a low level team and you're like in the top, barely in the top 10 or something, I would say you really cannot lose again. Or if anything, you can't get blown out again. Because otherwise, having two losses and just looking at this situation, it's going to become a bit more complicated to get in. But there has been a few two-loss teams that have gone to the college football playoff, 12 team wise last season, so it is possible. Um, but we just don't know what's going to happen. Like as of right now, we still have some remaining undefeated teams and a series of one-loss teams. But 4 to 5 games of football could completely change everything. Like as of right now, from the preseason rankings up to right now, we never expected anything like this except Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon. I guess Ole Miss being involved, and I guess Miami being tied up with BYU for whatever it's worth for that pity ranking. But there's still a lot of football left. There's some teams that have an easier schedule, so they may be able to cakewalk their way through as long as they don't have a slip up or play less than their A game. They should be fine. But others, there's there's a few teams that has like two to rank teams. They have to play down the stretch, including Oklahoma, unfortunately. And then I saw Texas. They have a top 10 schedule set up, which is holy crap, what is happening? But they also have an opportunity of playing back into the playoff contention, which I will get to. So there's a lot that's going to be left in this. I'm not going to go too much into it. I'm just going to go down the top 25 of their, well, not their remaining schedule per se, but I'm just going to look at some of them and just explain as much as how much of a chance do they have to closing out of the regular season, whether it's to get into a conference championship or potentially be in a playoff spot at least. So yeah, let's get started. We're going to go from the top 25 down to number 1, and I'll kind of explain as best as I possibly could. This is the first year doing this, but scenarios has been my hugest thing, and I would love to talk scenarios, which is why once the CFP rankings do come out next week, I'm gonna go in depth with it. It's gonna be fun. Um, okay, so we'll start with Memphis, and I honestly kind of have them in a trap game against Rice on Friday, just because in the last two games they played Rice, they won, but they were by 7 points or less, and it's at home as well too. Well, no, yeah, it was at home as well, at home, and then I think one game on the road. They won by 7 or less against Rice, but they're at Rice, and the last two losses happen to come from Rice's stadium. So I consider this as a trap game because what happened with UTSA again, I mean, what happened with Tulane against UTSA um, a few hours ago, I would watch out for Memphis when they play up against Rice. I don't know what's going to happen. It's the last day of Red October tomorrow, and it's on a Friday. And Red October's got to be fed with upsets, and maybe Rice closes things out against that ranked team before November. But otherwise, they have Tulane, they go to ECU, and then they close things out with Navy. And if you hear that, Memphis has a tough road down the stretch. So right now they did beat USF, but it doesn't mean they're out of they're out of there just yet. I mean, they got a tough stretch through. Like even ECU's a very tough team to deal with. Moving on to Utah. They host Cincinnati before going on a bye, and then they go to Baylor, and then they end their season against the Sunflower State, which is Kansas and Kansas State. It's technically not an easy finish, but Utah has beaten the crap out of nearly every team they have faced on that schedule except Texas Tech and BYU. They've beaten the literal crap out of everybody. And I don't mean they beat them, they beat the literal crap out of them. I mean, by 20 points, by 30 points, they destroy, like, whoever they play up against that was not Texas Tech or BYU, they were destroying them. And it just tells you they got a good defense, they got a good offensive line, and offense, their RPO style offense with a running quarterback has really worked well for them. So there's no reason they need to change much up. At this point, they should just keep going. They have a tough one against Cincinnati. I think Cincinnati's going to be a tough team to face up against, but to me, they're not, in my opinion, they're not BYU, they're not Texas Tech, and I also heard they lost their running back prior to that game. But at the same time, it comes down to if Devin Dampier is ready to go for this game because he's not 100%. But from what they said, there is no injury report that says they're going to keep him out from this game. So if Dampier is good to go, let's see how this plays out because if Utah beats them convincingly, they may work their way back into a conversation of maybe get one of the last playoff spots, but it is a deep stretch and they need some help. USC, one more game out of them, they're done. That's pretty much what I'm going to say. And it's going to start with Nebraska on Friday. And it's not easy. They're back in the rankings, and as I said about Memphis, they are a ranked team going on the road in the last day of October, of Red October, and they need to be fed upsets. Could it be Memphis? Maybe. USC could be the other team as well too. And it's to me, it's not going to be easy, even though Nebraska is not up to USC's level a little bit, but they got a good defense. They can compete. It just comes down to how the offense plays and what their productivity looks like. But the secondary, though, is going to be a bit of an issue because USC has a good passing game and it's going to open up the offense even more. Like in Lincoln Riley's offense, it is tough to stop if you do not have a top of the line defense. But outside of that, USC ends up hosting Northwestern that played pretty well this season. Then they host Iowa, which might be tough to be honest. And then they go to Oregon, definitely a tough game. And then UCLA, Winnable, but UCLA has played some good football just this recently after the Sean Foster firing. Then we go to Houston, who actually has an opportunity, only one loss, and their road is somewhat easier except one game. They play West Virginia. They go to UCF on a Friday. Be careful with that. On a Friday. And then they get a bye before hosting TCU, which is a very tough matchup. That's probably one game that's going to decide if Houston will be able to make it far to try to get into the playoff conversation or not. And then they finish things up at Baylor. I would be careful of overlooking if they somehow beat TCU because emotions could take over and it could spoil those opportunities. Michigan doesn't really have a tough one. I kind of will watch out with Northwestern and Maryland. They are not as bad. They're not great, but they're not as bad. They're competitive. They got some talent, but it's kind of hard to overlook a little bit of it. But they do face Purdue before getting the bye, and then they go to Northwestern and Maryland before coming back home to host Ohio State for the big game. If Michigan can clear things out, which is very possible, the game is pretty much their elimination game. They've lost 2 games already. They already had a conference loss against USC that's right behind them. And this game, they've already had Ohio State 4 times. If they beat them, Michigan's in the playoffs. If they lose, they're likely eliminated, depending on what happens with USC. Texas, just like Michigan, one more loss and they're done. However, and I really hate saying this, I would rather skip talking about Texas because I'm an Oklahoma fan and they piss me off every time I even think about them. But like I said, they have 3 games against top 10 opponents. We're talking Vanderbilt at Georgia and Texas A&M with Arkansas in the middle. But this is a chance for Texas to get themselves right back into the playoff conversation, maybe even potentially competing for an SEC title spot. And that is a far-reaching conversation to talk about because they've had a very struggling stretch, to be honest. They were not perfect to even start out this season. People are going to say their one good game was against Oklahoma, but I'm going to even say they didn't even play their best ball. Oklahoma's offense was limited with the injured John Mateer coming back this early, but they need to win out. They have no choice but to win out. They could beat out 2 of the 3 ranked teams, but I don't think it's enough for them to even have this conversation and be part of it. They have to win out because again, they lost 2 games this season. 2 games, 2 games. Yeah, they lost 2 games this season. If they lose again, it's really hard to get into the playoffs with a 3-loss team unless chaos takes over. So they face Vanderbilt this weekend at home, which is their leverage of getting Vanderbilt. But Vanderbilt's gonna come out physical with Diego Pavia. They have a chance to shut them down because they have much more talent than them, but they got to come out swinging. As I said, you got to play your A+ football. If they like it, I know I'm being a broken record, but if they can beat all 3 of those ranked teams and Arkansas, which they have to, Texas is back in the playoff conversation. If they lose one more game, it's over. No questions asked, unless there is chaos. Missouri still be in the playoff conversation. After a bye, they have Texas A&M at home and Mississippi State at home before they travel out to Oklahoma and Arkansas to close things out. But I got to be straight up with you. Unless that freshman quarterback does bring something to the table, I think it's over for Missouri. I think they're going to end up losing one more game. They have Texas A&M coming right out the bye unless something happens to A&M prior to that matchup. I'm sorry, this is likely over for Missouri. Good for me because I do not like Missouri as well too, but not good because Bo Pribula has been really a difference maker for this team and just finding out from seeing that gruesome injury, man, like that definitely hurts this team a whole lot. So let's just see what they look like. I think the offense is still good. They've got a lot of talent and experience, but how do they play without the quarterback though? Oklahoma, just like Texas, they can play their way back into the playoff conversation. But how is this offense? How is the run game? How is John Mateer? Again, like I said, I think it was too damn early to bring him back from an injury. I was not happy about it. I wanted to write it out with a backup quarterback. and just see what happens with it before Mateer comes back fully healthy. But Oklahoma got a little too desperate, and I just didn't like it. But they travel to Tennessee, and then they get a bye before they get right back out and play against Alabama at their place. Playing, being surrounded by 100,000 people is just not fun to deal with. Before they host Mizzou, that's without Bo Pribula, and LSU that has lost their head coach. Um, Again, it's really hard to say where Oklahoma ends up at. I would really love to see them in the college football playoffs, but I had them as an 8-win team anyway. So if they beat Tennessee, that kind of gives me hope, but it's a very cautious hope. But again, but if they lose, it's pretty much over. They can beat Alabama all they want. I just don't think it's enough for them to get back into the conversation, honestly. So for them to even have a chance, they got to win out. Even at least like getting 3 games in just to get themselves in that situation. But I think they have to win out no matter what, which means the offense has to have an answer in the run game, and most importantly, the offensive line. They just have not looked great, and they're beat up at the same time too. Cincinnati has been a very interesting story. I had a conversation with somebody about it. They are definitely a tough team. I mean, just seeing how they played up against Nebraska, they could have won this game for sure. They came up short. Their offense wasn't really on point until after that loss against Nebraska, and they've just came out swinging, averaging about 30 to 40 points on average, and just have really not slowed down. Like they've looked great, but they're going to Utah. They're going to Salt Lake. It's a pretty tough place to play. At their stadium, I've been to that stadium. It is pretty dang loud. It is ruckus. It is a good place though, man. It is awesome. But uh this is probably this is probably going to be a tough stretch for Cincinnati overall. Not only do they have Utah, but coming out of a bye, they play Arizona, which isn't a big deal. They could get a win off of that one. I really don't know where Arizona is at anyway. They kind of gone dark on me after the loss to BYU. Speaking of BYU, they face BYU. They're at home. They could get this, but they got to get off to a quick start to slow BYU down and pressure them, because when BYU gets physical, they get physical. They can play their football, they can play their style of football that gives opposing teams a hard time. And not only that, you got to hold the lead because they're not going to give up. And Bear Bachmeyer, the QB, is not going to go down without fighting. He's going to fight to get his team to a winning situation. So this is where I said before, Cincinnati has to play their A game. So they got 2 Utah teams that they have to be ready for. And then they close things out against TCU. So they got a tough stretch as well. Outside of Arizona, Utah, BYU, and even a gritty TCU is not going to be an easy finish for them. If they really want to show that they are capable of being the Cinderella for the college football playoff, they have to come out playing their A game starting at Salt Lake City. Louisville. Louisville could find their way in. I'm not really a fan of what their schedule looks like. They go to Vautech. We don't know who Vautech is right now, but they could make it complicated for Louisville's offense. Then they host Cal, and then they host Clemson on a Friday, and then they travel to SMU, not a team to take lightly. They are tough, and then they play Kentucky. We don't know where Kentucky's at, but they're kind of showing some competitiveness, but they're not fully 100% competitive. We don't know, but it is a rivalry game. So we'll see how that plays, but it is not going to be an easy finish for Louisville. If they find some way to finish off their schedule that way, I would even say they should be in the playoffs, to be honest. And then there's Virginia. Here's my opinion. I don't want to, if anybody even supports Virginia, they're probably going to be pissed off at me. But I think they had a good run. I love their team. I love their offense. I love everything that Virginia had. Like Chandler Morris is awesome to watch, honestly. But I feel like their end's going to come. It could be against Cal on the road. It could be against Wake Forest, which has played some good football lately. It could be at Duke, and they are a tough ass team. It could be Vautech. Again, we don't know who Vautech is, but it is a rivalry game, and anything can happen in the last week of the season. Tennessee. Does not have too much of a tough stretch, but they have a defensive Oklahoma team to deal with. We'll see what that plays out. We'll see how that plays out. Then they face New Mexico State and go to Florida. No big deal, but maybe Florida could trap them a little bit. And then if they were to survive all three games and hope to God they don't against Oklahoma, they have Vanderbilt. And holy crap, Vanderbilt is going to be a tough out. And if Vanderbilt gets this far, this could be one of the most epic matchups to end on a season finale of college football before the conference championship. I would kind of like to see it, but at the same time, I would like to spoil Tennessee's chances as an Oklahoma fan. But again, if they get this far, I feel like this is an elimination game between Vanderbilt and Tennessee. It all depends on where they're placed, pretty much. But this is pretty much for a playoff spot at this point. Texas Tech. I still think Texas Tech is going to find themselves in the playoffs. But Kansas State has been a tough matchup for them the past few seasons. It has not been a good run for them against them. But Kansas State has struggled of late, so it is possible they can get past them and survive. But then they got to host BYU, which is going to be a tough out, as I explained before. And then they host UCF, and then they go to West Virginia. West Virginia has not been good, but again, last week of the season, and it is a very tough place to play at Morgantown, from what I've heard. So if I were Texas Tech, just play A+ football throughout, and they could get in and just be like the Texas Tech softball team that paid $1 or $2 million to that pitcher, which she is awesome. Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame will find themselves back in the college football playoffs, but we'll see what the rankings look like when it comes out next week for the CFP polls. They travel to Boston College, they host Navy, they travel to Pitt. I would not underestimate them, to be honest. And then they got Syracuse at home, and then they go to Stanford, which Stanford has been kind of been a little sneaky lately. I don't know what was going on. It didn't seem like they were there like in the first game against Hawaii, but then all of a sudden now they kind of have that upset mind every week type of thing. Even though they haven't really been that successful in some games, but they've been a bit more sneaky. Hold on, sorry, I gotta get my water. All right. Now that I got my voice about to go into the top 10, I don't really see anything on Notre Dame's schedule that's going to keep them from getting back in and probably finishing off their schedule to get into the CFP. But it is going to be complicated. They have to hope A&M and Miami finish out their schedule because they did lose to both of them, and they really need to look good for Notre Dame's resume for them to even be considered into it. But I would kind of watch out for Pitt. I don't think Navy's going to be a problem. The last few games they played against them, it has been kind of like a blowout from the majority of the matchups they faced against them. So now we get into the top 10. Let's see if my voice can make it. They go Before I get into that, this is where Miami's going to really have to find out if they are a playoff team or not. Because the past few seasons, if anybody has paid attention to them, they find a way to kind of choke themselves out of it. Starting with SMU, this is definitely an A+ game they have to play because if they don't, SMU is gonna push them out of the playoffs, like no doubt. I think this is where SMU will be able to get ranked as well too. But this will no doubt push Miami out of a conversation. Even if they finish up strong, they will be pushed out of the conversation. I will hold you to that one for sure. They host Syracuse, which kind of fell off a little bit. They lost their quarterback, so now they have I forgot his last name, but his first name is Ricky. I know that for sure. And then they host NC State, which I would not take lightly. They are a gritty team. Virginia Tech, don't know who they are, but playing in their home environment, knowing for the fact the ranked teams coming in, they're going to have a little bit of ruckus going. At Pitt, definitely shouldn't take lightly. They're a good team. They have not been up to that point, but they're a good team. And I look at this, if they get this far, I feel like the NC State game could wear them down a little bit to where Vatek or Pitt could actually finish them off. So if I were Miami fans out there, if anybody even gives a shit of listening to me, I would actually hold my breath a little bit because the last few games of their regular season is going to be a turbulent one. And then we get to BYU. They have a bye right now after coming back and beating the crap out of Iowa State at the end. Then they go to Texas Tech, which they're going to be very much tested on. This is going to be a game that could be a Big 12 title preview, or this could be where Texas Tech takes full control of the Big 12 at this point and just find out who their challenger is. Then they host TCU, which I wouldn't take too lightly. TCU could compete with BYU. And then they go to Cincinnati, just like Utah's situation. BYU is going to have a tough challenge against Cincinnati, especially in their environment. With how built BYU is, Cincinnati could be up to that point and up to that task to try and slow down that freshman QB. And then they host UCF, which shouldn't be too much of a problem, honestly. BYU pretty much has 3 games that they have to be able to get those wins to put themselves in the Big 12 title game. Because if they lose one, they're going to have to fight for a CFP, a playoff spot, pretty much, which means they're just going to have to roll with Texas Tech going this far and then trying and hoping that Utah can win some games to keep things going. Vanderbilt, just like I said about Texas, Vanderbilt has a chance to get themselves into the SEC title game, but they're going to need some help to get that opportunity. Not only that, they have to win out to be in the CFP playoff spot, but it's not going to be easy. They have to go to Darrell Royal Stadium and beat Texas. Texas has struggled. Their offense has not been consistent, but their defense is definitely one of the best in the nation. And this is probably Vanderbilt's biggest challenge of all time. This is where Pavia and the rest of the guys have to play A plus football. Where they get their A plus football, we do not know, but their defense has to help out as well too. And then they face Auburn, get a bye week, face Kentucky, which is no big deal. And if they somehow survive with maybe a few scratches and scars on it, they face Tennessee at their place, which could be the most epic game to finish things off if Tennessee can close out their schedule prior to that matchup. Georgia Tech, nice story, still undefeated, making a run for it. They have not lost a step. They look like an old school football team that has been playing their best football up to that stretch. But I'm looking at this schedule. They could either close it out with no problem or they might have an issue. They go to NC State, which I would not take lightly. They got a bye week before they go to Boston College. Then they face Pitt, which is actually a good competitive team. And then if they were able to survive all of it unscathed, hoping they don't have a one loss, this could be the most epic game to watch in the last week of the regular season against Georgia in Atlanta, which is technically a home game for Georgia Tech. And last year was an epic one. I mean, the last 2 years, Georgia Tech has competed with Georgia, and Georgia kind of had a bit of a scare last season. And with how Georgia has played lately, like Gunnar Stockton will put this team on his back and just do everything they can to carry him. The run game has been pretty solid too. But Georgia Tech feels like they have enough confidence to actually upset Georgia. If it were even possible, it doesn't even matter what happens in the ACC title game. Georgia Tech is in the college football playoff because of that game itself. There has been games to where Georgia Tech won where it caught our attention, but there was nothing convincing for us, and they've kind of been quiet. But this is the game that would make a lot of noise for the Atlanta area. This would be awesome for Georgia Tech. Ole Miss has the easiest schedule amongst all top 25 teams that finish off their schedule. And I mean, seriously, they have nothing left on their schedule that's going to hold them, maybe again, except Mississippi State. They face South Carolina, the Citadel, Florida. They got to bye before they play Mississippi State. They got to bye before playing Mississippi State. I think at this point, I got to give some props to Lane Kiffin and this team. I mean, they had the original quarterback, Austin Simmons, and then he went down with the injury, hasn't looked the same. But then all of a sudden, Trinidad Chambliss comes out of nowhere and is playing his best football. I mean, he could be an NFL draft QB at some point. Not saying he's a top 5, but he could be drafted somewhere at some point, probably day 2, day 3. But Ole Miss has played well up to this point, and now the fact they got an easier schedule with just Mississippi State to deal with, they're a playoff team, no doubt. They don't have to be in a conference title game to be a playoff team, but they've done enough to where they're in that spot now. Okay, we move on to Oregon. We're gonna really find out who Oregon is this season. It looked like they were a great team after they beat Penn State, but then they got bested by Indiana in a very competitive game, which is not bad. Defense played really well. The offense did the best they could. They were not consistent though, but they got bigger challenges in front of them. After their bye, they go to Iowa, the toughest place for Oregon to have to play in, next to Washington on the road this season. Then they face Minnesota on a Friday. Minnesota on a Friday. Minnesota already upset in Nebraska on a Friday. They will not hesitate to do the same thing to Oregon. So it all comes down to how Oregon plays against Iowa. They could be battered, they could be bruised because of how well the defense plays, and this will make it tough for them against Minnesota. They are a gritty ass team as well too. And if they were able to survive that, they got USC. And if USC survives this long and stays in the top 25, they got an even tough stretch against USC. You know, their Oregon's defense is good. They'll be able to do everything to slow them down a little bit. But with how good Lincoln Riley's offense is, Oregon's offense has to be able to keep up with them. If they don't, this could be the end for Oregon. And if they were able to survive that schedule this long, they got Washington, as I said before. I don't know, man. I really don't know about Oregon. I feel like they're going to be the biggest question for a top 10 team to try to keep themselves in and try to get into a playoff spot. But to me, I'm looking at this and it's not looking good. I don't know if they'll be able to get in. I really don't. But if they somehow survive and pull everything off, I commend to Oregon. I would honestly not face them in the postseason if they survive this long for it. And then there's Georgia. Georgia should be a playoff team, no doubt. They go to Florida. I don't think it's going to be much of a problem. I think it's in Jacksonville. I don't know if they got rid of the neutral site and is playing home and home now, but I know they got Florida in Jacksonville for all I know. So we'll just keep it at that. Then they go to Mississippi State. I don't think it's going to be a problem for Georgia, but I think it's going to be a tough one, to be honest, because how their defense has been against like good offensive teams. Like, okay, Mississippi State ain't that great, but their offense ain't bad either. All it takes is just a few good big plays to kind of get Georgia on their heels a little bit and kind of worry a little bit. So we don't know how it's going to be. It could be a shootout or it could be a blowout for Georgia against Mississippi State. They face Texas, which again, they're going to be facing one of the toughest defenses in college football and in the SEC. But we'll see how things are after Texas gets through their tough stretch with Vanderbilt at some point. I don't think it's going to be easy, to be honest. I really don't think it's going to be easy. I'm just trying to figure things out, like how it's going to play out. But it's definitely going to be I think it's going to just be one of the toughest games that Georgia faces. But if they were able to survive, they got Charlotte, and then they go right to Atlanta to face Georgia Tech, as I explained earlier. So Georgia has somewhat of a tricky trap, tough stretch, but they should still be at least a playoff team to at least a CFP spot. But if they survive that long, we'll see what happens with Alabama and A&M, which I'm going into right now. Alabama has a bye before they go to LSU. No, before they host LSU. And then they host Oklahoma, which, depending on what happens with Oklahoma, they could be dealing with one of the toughest defenses in the SEC as well, too. And they did not have a good game last season. It was inconsistent. It was bad. There was two opportunities to where they could have scored on Oklahoma before the penalties got them, and the out of bounds play got them as well, too. But if it's anything like what happened with Vanderbilt against Alabama this season, I don't think it should be a problem with them against Oklahoma. But for me, I'm kind of hoping it does happen again, and Oklahoma somehow goes to their house and beat them, which I really hope for. Knocking on Pencilwood, I would love another upset. So then Oklahoma could be 4-0 against the state of Alabama in 2 seasons. Two Alabama teams in the SEC, they beat them twice. I would love that. And then after that, they got Eastern Illinois, and then they go to Auburn. We have no idea what the Iron Bowl is going to look like. Auburn has not looked consistent, but they tried their best to get themselves in a winning position, and they got screwed over on multiple occasions against the refs, which you're seeing down here. They have been the theme for a good bit for some stupid, questionable ass calls, and I think they need to get their shit together. And I want to go into a tangent over the NFL and the NCAA and all that, protecting them and all that bullshit, and just saying to the players and the coaches, just shut the hell up or going to get fined or whatever. But the refs need to take a lot of accountability. Not some, not a little, a lot, if not everything. So we move on to Texas A&M. To be honest, they're in the same position as Ole Miss. I think their schedule just got so much lighter. If Missouri did not lose their quarterback, I think this would have been a pretty interesting game to watch. But now at this point, without it, we don't know how the freshman is going to look, and unfortunately, it's going to be complicated for them. But and as I'm saying this, A&M has a bye before playing against Missouri, so Missouri has a game to kind of figure out who their freshman QB is all about, and if he can get himself like situated for this. But after that, A&M has South Carolina that hasn't been good, Sanford, and then they go to Texas, which again could be one of the most epic games to finish off this season. If Texas survives and gets this far, and A&M stays undefeated, we got an epic game that could decide everything. Mostly for Texas because this is their elimination game at this point if they get this far. But A&M, they're trying to get to the SEC title game. Texas could be the ones battling for the SEC title game, depending on what happens with their game against Georgia and then whoever else. But there's a lot of scenarios that's going to play based on this game, and I cannot wait for it if they both survive this long. Well, Texas A&M, F Texas, I don't really give a shit about them. So we move on. Now we get down to the top two. Indiana doesn't really have a tough game, but they could be trappy games. We're talking at Maryland and at Penn State back to back. They face Wisconsin that has a good defense, but I don't think it should be a problem because they do not have an offense. Then they have a bye and go to Purdue, which I mean Purdue tries, but trying is such an overrated word if we want to put it, just with how Indiana has played to this season. So yeah, at this point, Indiana could go undefeated unless they fall into a trap against Maryland or Penn State at this very moment as we talk about it. But Indiana has a bye prior to those two games, so this actually looks good for them. And then Ohio State, we don't know who. We really don't know what this matchup's going to look like this weekend. Penn State has really fallen off the rails after losing to Oregon, pretty much, and they just have not looked the same ever since. But they got a defense, they got a run game. But how does this play out with every other spot? Jim Knowles does know this Ohio State offense, but it can go so far if the offense for Penn State can't get anything going. So, as of right now, probably like everybody, this could be an easy win for Penn State. I mean, for Ohio State, but I don't know. I really don't know. I really don't know. I don't know if Ohio State's going to beat them by a lot or if it's going to be a close game, but I know Ohio State's going to beat Penn State. Penn State had that one chance this season, and they just blew it all up after that loss to UCLA. And then firing their coach after that. So it is what it is with it. Then they go to Purdue. Unless Purdue has a motivating speech for another ill child or something, I think Ohio State gets past Purdue. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for throwing it out there like that, but that's just how I feel right now about it. Then they host UCLA, which should be an easy win, and then Rutgers as well too. So this is where the very last game of the season might also become an epic finish. We got the game against Michigan at Michigan. Ohio State has played their best football. However, though, where has their best games been since Texas? We used to be Illinois, but Illinois has fallen off the top 25, and we don't know if they're going to be back. They play Penn State, but Penn State has fallen off the wheels ever since that loss against Oregon and have not come back ever since. So I feel like the game is going to be their toughest matchup because despite how great Ohio State has been, Michigan gets into their head and they I think they have the whole thing rent free if not owned. Like at this point they got real estate over in Columbus. It is really hard to kind of pinpoint where Ohio State will be with Michigan. But if there is a game to where Ohio State can prove that they are the team to beat and win the entire thing, it would be against Michigan. But at the same time, they did lose to Michigan last season and they went on to win the whole thing. So I don't know how this is going to go. But we know for sure this probably is going to be the biggest matchup to end everything in the regular season, next to some of the SEC games that's going to be epic matchups to end everything. So, yeah, I think at this point, for the number one team in the nation, like since they beat Texas, this is probably going to see if Ohio State is the team to beat in the college football playoff, depending on the result. I'm not going to say win or lose at this point. It's going to be depending on the result. Okay, so that's pretty much it. I didn't think I was going to talk this long, but I love me some football and everything else. Um, but yeah, I'm pretty much going to sign off here. Next week, the CFP rankings do come out for the first time, so once I watch that, I might do a reaction for it, but I really don't know. I might set something up just as my own prediction after this past weekend before I can see what those rankings look like with the top 10 teams. And if it looks anything like what I'm probably going to put down, then I'll probably come on and do my reaction right after the rankings are over. But if not, I'll come in on Wednesday and talk about it. But yeah, thank you guys for enduring my conversation of the top 25. This is the first time. It just feels long, but I'm doing the best I can to make it as thorough, and as much information as possible for it. But it's still practice for me. I want to do better. But yeah, y'all have a great night wherever you are. Could be day as well too. Could be afternoon. And also fuck those refs. They need to get their shit together because they're starting to ruin the game of football this season. And I feel really bad for Auburn right now. So I'm sorry, guys. I hope things do go better for you. But yeah, peace out, guys. See you later.